Hello, everybody, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gia. I am a 25-year-old lady who lives in my mom's basement, and this is the October wrap-up. October was my most prosperous reading month out of 2022 so far. That is not really saying a great deal, considering I didn't start reading much more in until over the summer, like until July or so. But thus far, over the course of my reading journey, October has been my most prosperous month so far. And in total, I read 9 books this month. I started off strong in October with A Court of Mist and Fury. I rated it 5 stars. I gave it its own video. It was the first Sequel Saturday video where I obsessed over it for 35 minutes. I found it to be a vast improvement from the first book, even though the first book I did give 4 stars. I think that A Court of Thorns and Roses was quite well written, but I did have a couple of reservations about it. But Mist and Fury really did take what made A Court of Thorns and Roses so good and ran with it. And of course, I really liked how Sarah J. Maas wrote PTSD and how it can affect people in different ways. And I liked the development of Feyre and Rhysand's relationship as in addition to the um, cast of characters that we were introduced to at the Night Court and the happenings that were there. I'm very excited to read the third book. The second book got a 5 stars for me. The second book I read was A Botanist's Guides to Parties and Poisons by Kate Kavari. This book was a 3-star read for me. I read it in a couple of sittings. It was pretty fast paced. If you're looking for a book that is kind of STEMinist in nature but isn't too long winded about the STEM part of it, I think this is a really good story. This is about our girl named, what's her name? Saffron. Her name is Saffron. She is a research assistant in the botany department at University College London, or UCL, and she is embroiled in this mystery because her research advisor ends up being framed for the crime of poisoning the wife of another professor. And it kind of kicks off this bit of a Scooby-Doo mystery vibe where she is trying to figure out what is going on. And of course, they don't really involve the police, and a lot of investigating is done by her. I just found that it's if you're looking for something that's really fast paced, like this is the book for you, but I felt like it could have done more with the suspense and the tense scenes. If it were me, if I was the one writing it, I would have done a little bit more with not making things so obvious, because it really was just Saffron going through a bunch of academic offices and finding clues. She really just was breaking into people's offices and uncovering the entire mystery. So I don't really believe that like the entire mystery can be solved by just looking into somebody's filing cabinets, but at the same time, like, I understand how something like that could be buried in, the back of the cabinet itself. That this was very well orchestrated in a way, like what they were trying to cover up, the mystery in the end that was trying to be covered up, like it was done, in a way like that could be hidden, because who's going to bother going looking through all of those things. But at the same time, I wish there was more. I wish there was more scenes where she was doing other things or more interactions with the police and everything. This story takes place in the early 1900s. So it has a bit of a Victorian feel to it, just a little teeny bit. This story made me think of like arsenic and absinthe. Like, I don't know what the second book title is, but honestly, if you told me that the next book title was called A Botanist's Guide to Arsenic and Absinthe, like, I would 100% think that was real. Um, but in the end, it was a 3-star read for me. I don't think that it was extremely like breaking the mold as far as STEMinist books go. I think that it could have been, again, elaborated on more. Like, it needed more meat. Like, the book itself was 300 pages. I feel like if you took out a little bit of the same mystery elements that were going back and forth with just Saffron breaking into academic offices and then adding in some more meaty things that happened, I think it would have been a much more well-rounded story. And I wish there was more of the STEM. Honestly, like, I'm one of those weirdos where I want more of the science talk. I want more nerd talk. But that's just me. Moving on to The Family Plot by Megan Collins. It was Megan Collins. I picked up this book after I watched Chandler talk about it several months ago. It seemed to be really interesting to me. This was the main thriller that I read this Halloween season. It was probably the only one that could have been considered a thriller, and it honestly scared the shit out of me. This story is about a family that doesn't necessarily like worship murder victims, but they say that they acknowledge them and remember them and honor them by shaping their entire private like homeschool curriculum around storytelling about these people. So instead of doing a book report on Lord of the Flies, they were doing book reports on murder victims, and every member of the family was named after somebody who was brutally murdered. So Charlie was named after Charles Lindbergh, the Lindbergh baby, who was kidnapped and then sent back and in dismembered bits and pieces for ransom. And then Tate, who was the older sister, was named after Sharon Tate, who was a very famous actress who was killed by the Manson family. And then you had Dahlia, who was named after Black Dahlia. And then Andy, who was her twin, who was named after Andrew Borden, who was Lizzie Borden's father. So they all are a bit fucked up. Like all the kids are a bit fucked up. And their dad dies in the beginning of the book, and they go to bury him out back. And it's the first time they've all been home in a really long time. And when they dig up the grave to bury their dad, they find the skeleton of their brother who ran away 10 years ago. And so the mystery kind of rotates around like what happened to their brother, because there was also a serial killer on the island that stopped killing a while ago. So there was, a serial killer who lived on the island with a family who revered murder victims, and then the brother ran away 10 years ago, and then now he's all of a sudden dead. So they're trying to figure out like two mysteries here. Who was the identity of the serial killer and who killed their brother? So by the end of the story, of course, no spoilers if you are interested in reading something like that, it definitely took some turns that I didn't expect. However, not for the reason that like um I didn't expect the conclusion to get to. So like the person who I thought did it was who did it, but not for the reasons that I thought that they did, or not how I thought they did. So it did take me a little bit by surprise. And honestly, by the time like it got around to suspecting literally every person, I did have to sit there and if you saw the reading vlog, you saw this. I was literally sitting there talking to myself, like thinking about every person in the family. I was like, anybody in this family could be a psycho, because they were all really weird. Like every member of the family was really weird. The older brother was a thespian who was like using acting as a way to cope so that he'd never have to like be himself. And then the older sister was like a mega Instagram influencer whose main thing as an artist was to make miniature dioramas, like that serial killer in the original CSI where they made murder dioramas. And then the Dahlia just kind of looks for her brother as like a pastime. So the whole family is weird. The whole family is full of wackos. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars just because it it was 3 stars to me. And I think my biggest gripe with the family plot is that none of the characters were likable in any way. I wasn't rooting for any of the characters. They were all extremely annoying, obnoxious, terrible people. Like every single one of them was not a good person. Even Dahlia. Like I couldn't even find myself rooting for Dahlia, who's supposed to be the main character, because she was straight up mean. She was very protective over the idea of her twin brother like knowing other people other than her. She was very insistent that like her brother was the only person who knew the real her, and she was the only person who knew the real him. So she was protective over his memory, in that if anybody insinuated that they had a connection to Andy in any way, she got very mean about it. She was just a super bitch, and her connection to her twin was borderline incestuous, and the elder two siblings were really weird too about that. So like there was a bit of a creepy element in the way that like all the siblings were connected to each other in ways other than their sibling relationship. But the twins in particular, like Dahlia was annoying and she was mean. Like I couldn't even root for her as somebody who was mourning her brother, is that she was just a mean spirited person that I wouldn't want to be around. So I think the main issue for me with this story was not the plot, although it was a bit, by the end of it, you're like, okay, that makes sense. But like the way they get to the end of it, you're like, oh, wow, like this is not what I expected. But if they had just made the characters more lovable as people, or at least you were more sympathetic towards them, like I think you're supposed to be sympathetic towards them because at the end they have a big come to Jesus meeting about how fucked up their lives were. And it's like, yeah, you can have sympathy for them, but they're not expressing that they they acknowledge that the way that they grew up was fucked up, but they're not actively trying to change it. They're in the state where they're like wallowing in it. And I think if you write the characters as moving out of that black pool of being, my cat's got the zoomies. I think if you actually write characters as coming out of the things that traumatize them in a way, like it makes them more sympathetic because you see that they're actively trying to change. But I didn't see that in this instance, and it didn't hit for me. It was a 3 star, 3 stars for the family plot. The next was The Inheritance Games. This was amazing. 4 stars. It was not a 5 star for several reasons, but it was a good old 4 star fun. I really enjoyed the mystery elements, the puzzles that they had to go through. I think that the love triangle between Avery, Grayson, and Jameson is interesting. Like I can hardly tell some of the brothers apart because their names are so similar, but like it's really obvious who she's supposed to end up with, but you find yourself questioning it. But it's very much crafted to be like a love triangle. Pinecone is like galloping around the basement right now. I do not know what's happening. If I ever feared that maybe she was starting to slow down because she was getting older, she starts doing shit like this, and I think, nope, she's fine. I think what made the Inheritance Games a 4 star read instead of a 5 star read for me was a bit of the contrived whining of teenagerdom that I've grown tired of. Like, I'm almost 26 years old, so I can tell when like teenagers are written by people who either have raised teenagers or have been enough to the teenager experience still because of their young age, or they're like parents writing teenagers, like Gen X writing teenagers in a TV show. Like, we all know that vibe. And I'm just not. I can feel it. Like, I can feel it when the teenagers are written to be like overly contrived stereotypes that are not reflective of what being real teenagers are like. So I found them extremely dramatic and not very fun to read about sometimes. Like, I understood some of their reservations. I understood Avery probably the most because she underwent the most change. But we need to write believable teenagers, please, just a little bit. Also, the formatting of the story to have really short chapters did mess with me a little bit, just because it felt like an action movie in that everything was going by really, really quickly and that events were changing really fast, and it was like every chapter was just a scene in a TV show. It felt very quick-cutty, but if you're into that sort of fast-paced writing, I can see why that would work for you. I would prefer that the chapters were longer, but they were still maybe cut up. Like, you can have all the same scenes, but don't carve them up into all these chapters. It honestly feels like when, and this is gonna sound a little stupid, but like for the girlies who used to write fan fiction, you didn't always have time to sit down and write like 10,000 or 20,000 words for a chapter, right? Sometimes you would write like 500 words to 1,000 words for a chapter. You're just sitting there and writing down whatever comes to mind between having dinner, doing your homework, and going to bed. Like, you don't have time to craft these masterpieces if you're uploading every fucking Tuesday afternoon. So I understand how short format writing like that is made. Like, it's, sometimes you just don't have the time, or it's just the style that you prefer, but that's the vibe that I got from it. And I honestly wish that it was just, you can have these short blurbs, but like stick them all together in one chapter because they all like go together. I don't understand why that wouldn't be the case. So I personally just preferred it to be, I would have preferred the chapters to be longer, but that's just me. Other than that, when I think about the Inheritance Games, I also think about the ending. The first half of the book definitely dragged for me, but the second half of the book did not. The second half of the book was great. It went by really quickly, and I think that it really answered a lot of questions. I was intrigued about the premise of the next book. I was interested in where the story was going to go, despite my issues with the way that the chapters were formatted and the over dramatization of the teenagers and the drama between them and stuff. Like, now that that has sat in my brain a little bit longer, I understand teenagers are dramatic, but I didn't really like it that much. But other than that, I'm really intrigued to see where the story goes. So I will be picking up the Hawthorne Legacy here in the coming weeks. It's actually, I've been pushing off The Loan from Libby because I have so many other books I need to get to, but it will get its own video for Sequel Saturday, and I'm really excited to pick it up after I read through my next list of library books that I need to get through by next Monday. The next book that I read was The Traitor Queen by Danielle L. Jensen. This will be a Sequel Saturday video that will go up tomorrow. If you're watching this the day that I upload this on Friday, the video for it will be up tomorrow. It'll be the next video in the list. And this is the second book in the Bridge Kingdom series, in which we follow Lara and Aaron in the reclaiming of Ithacana from Maradrena's hands. So at the end of the Bridge Kingdom, Lara accidentally exposed everything to her father, who was the worst person imaginable. After she was raised to be a political assassin and she realized that her father was the true enemy, Lara tries her best to mitigate the damage that she's caused, but in the end it is futile, and Erin is captured by her father and she is outcasted by the Ithacanians, but she goes back on her hands and knees and says, I will do my best to get him back, and then you can send me on my way. Like, you don't have to threaten to kill me. I will just go on my merry way and you never have to see me again. And they take her word for it, and she goes in and of course she attempts to rescue him. And the Traitor Queen follows the story of how first of all how Lara goes to rescue Aaron, but how Lara and Aaron have been reduced from lovers to enemies again to lovers again. So this is the enemies to lovers again book, because we explore how they basically fall back in love with each other after Lara commits this ultimate betrayal, unbeknownst to her, and like not, she didn't want to. She didn't do it out of maliciousness, and the fact that she, was brainwashed her entire life, that she's still unlearning a lot of behaviors and unlearning a lot of things that she was told throughout her life. So I gave the book 4 stars. It did not slap as hard as The Bridge Kingdom did. I said in both the reading vlog and in the Sequel Saturday that I think a lot of it had to do with the change in how they navigated relationships from building to strengthening, and I just think that more could have been discussed about Lara and Aaron's relationship. I also found Aaron to be very whiny in the second book. Like, he made it all about himself in the end. It wasn't just about what Lara did. It was like, I shouldn't have trusted her to begin with. Like, he made it about him, and that wasn't the tea. Like, that wasn't it. So I think that could have been improved a little bit, but I didn't hate it, of course, and I'm still invested enough to read The Inadequate Heir, which is the story, I think, of Lara's brother Karis, who is kind of like the second favorite son to Silas, her father. He's the philosopher and the scholar, and he's the one who is smart. So I have a feeling that we will go through his story and how he ascends to some sort of power, and I am excited to see where that one goes. And how could I forget Promises and Pomegranates by Sav R. Miller? I wish that I could forget that I reread this book at the beginning of this month, because the second time was worse than the first, and it docked a star off of the reading. Because when I first read this book, it was maybe the second or third book I had read for fun after coming back from my reading for fun hiatus, and I was like, oh, it's like 3 stars. It's fine. But like now that I've read a couple more romances since then that are smutty in nature and like navigate relationships that are sexual in nature and are potentially like dark and twisted, this won it, and it was bad. It docked a whole star off of it. It is a 2-star read for me. It's easily the worst book I've read this year. Period. And it docked some years off my life. Like that book stressed me out. It is not good. I do not recommend that you read it. It is a Hades and Persephone retelling about a mob boss daughter and a ex-doctor, and he used to work for the mob boss, and then there's blackmail involved, and they end up married and falling in love with each other, but there is a steep age gap between them of like 19 and 32. So it is yikes, to say the least. It is not good. The sex scenes are not great. Not to kink shame anybody, but there's knife play and blood play involved. Also, the fact that this is literally a Vampire Diaries fan fiction, and it is not shy about it. I made a whole video about it. Go watch it. I'm proud of it. Anyway, 2 stars. I wish to erase this book from my memory both times that I read it. And then the last 3 books that I read this month were Vampire Academy, Frostbite, and Shadowkiss, the first 3 books in the Vampire Academy sexology. Wouldn't that be a series of 6 books? I gave the first book 5 stars because it fucking slaps, as it should. I've read it. This was my 4th time reading it, and it slapped the 3rd time, and it slapped even harder the 4th time. If I were to look at it from a critical perspective, as though I was reading it for the first time, I think that the first book does an excellent job setting up the universe and how the kind of interconnected politics all are involved with each other, and what people mean to each other, the relationships with others, and the hierarchy of society, and the royal families, and the intricacies of what it's like in this universe. And I thought that it was very well done. I think that the magic system is it requires work, but further into the series it does get more complicated than that. I think that both Alyssa and Rose are extremely well-rounded characters. Rose in particular, they're foils to each other, like the girls are foils to each other, but I think that as a reader, most people would probably press themselves onto Rose the most. She has severe mommy issues, with hyper-independence as her main flaw. But you can really see that these girls aren't perfect. They do have some personal problems and flaws. Rose in particular has some issues with impulse control. But in general, the story slaps. In general, the story still slaps, and I would give it 5 stars again if I read it again tomorrow. Frostbite, though, Frostbite got 4 stars from me, and I'll tell you why. Because the vibes were about as familiar to me as Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1. Like, it felt like the camping episode in an anime. It felt like we were on Christmas vacation, which they were. That was the entire point. Like, it did its thing. This series is 6 books, right? It's quite big. It's quite large. So of course one could argue that there's potentially some filler that could be taken out. I would argue that this is probably a necessary book in the series, because what Frostbite does is do a great job at setting up tension for the rest of the series, because in Shadowkiss things get more and more intense. So from the beginning of Vampire Academy to the start of Shadowkiss, it's only been about 6 months. So I think that, this book taking place over Christmas vacation is an extremely necessary part of the book to build tension with the outside world, because the majority of what we're finding out in Frostbite is like Strigoi attacks, and the Strigoi are mobilizing, and things are happening where things are happening in the outside world that they need to get prepared for. It's not just 0 to 100, oh no, the Strigoi have mobilized. No, this was the time where we had the opportunity to explore everybody's relationships on the side with each other while the world building and was happening in the background, because things really do heat up when you get to Shadowkiss, and I mean that literally. This book is a monster. It's almost 500 pages, but it is awesome. This book is awesome, like start to finish. It's a really good book. At the end of Frostbite, there is a major character death, and at the beginning of Shadowkiss, this is when everybody is coming to terms with this major character death. Everybody is experiencing the grief and the PTSD of what happened as a result of this major character death. So this is the book where everybody is processing what is happening to them in the midst of like the last semester of their senior year, where they're doing their main like final internships with staged Strigoi attacks with the Guardians to learn how to respond to them. And they're being graded on this field experience and how well they protect their charges, right? So this is the book where everybody is kind of like, all right, we're not in a classroom anymore. You need to learn how to do this in the real world, all while they are attempting to deal with the grief and the PTSD of what they had already prior experienced. Rose is starting to see ghosts and she doesn't understand why. That's another thing that happens in Shadowkiss, is like Rose is doing a lot of exploration of what it means to be shadow kissed. So we know and we learn that Lissa's powers of spirit were activated when she saw Rose's dead body after the car crash, and she resurrected Rose from the dead. And as a result, Rose is close to the world of the dead. And their logic is that the more that she kills, the more that she will become connected to the world of the dead. So she becomes like a Strigoi GPS where she can kind of feel them nearby. She has this kind of nauseous feeling, and when she's outside of the wards of the academy or anywhere, she starts to see ghosts. So that's fun. That's horrifying. So she's trying to figure out what the fuck is going on with her and like how it's all linked to Lissa's spirit usage. So there's a lot of exploration of magic and power in this book. Oh, by the way, I gave it 5 stars. Like, this is a vast improvement to me over Frostbite. Not that I don't think that Frostbite wasn't necessary narratively to tell the story, but I think that this really takes everything that we knew about the world and just expands upon it. But we're also learning a lot about what happened between, Rose and Lissa, and what happened when Rose was resurrected and how that affects her, because that's known as like a huge cardinal sin. So Rose is also combating some of the things, like some of the trauma about the fact that she will always have to give up her life for Lissa, and that she will never have her own life or her own choices, that everything she does will have to be living her life for somebody else. And they actually send her to therapy, and I thought that the therapy sessions were written quite well, because her therapist is just like, and you're okay with that? Having no life besides protecting somebody else until you eventually die or something? Like, you're cool with that? Basically being a bodyguard for the rest of your life and never having one of your own. And Rose is just like fighting behind gritted teeth, like, yeah, I'm fine with that. I've always been fine with that. It's the way I've been raised. And then she comes to find out later, she's like, actually, I'm not. Actually, this is kind of bullshit. So I think that it does an excellent job of, really bringing to a head all of the things that we've learned so far about Lissa and Rose's powers and their connection, plus with the Strigoi attacks and how the Strigoi are kind of mobilizing and, organized in their own way to attack the royal families. But it also is a really good climax for a third book. Like, if we're halfway through the series and it ends on a very extreme cliffhanger that I'm not going to tell you. So it really does bring a lot of the tension to a peak of like a halfway point of the story. Like, in and of itself is its own finale, but it also like is a really good marker to say like, oh, shit's gonna get real for the next half of the series. Like, this isn't child's play anymore. Shit's getting real. So Anyway, 5 stars. Those are the 9 books that I read in October. I'm hoping to read more in November. I actually just finished Shadow Kiss. It is technically November 1st, but I just finished this. I only had a quarter of it left. But I wanted to go ahead and put this in the October wrap up because I read most of it in October and because I wanted to discuss the 3 books in their entirety together and how they all like have their own arc. Basically, the first 3 books are their own arc, and books 4, 5, and 6 will have their own. It's like the second half arc of the series. The next books that I will be reading are, and I've already started this one, but Realmbreaker by Victoria Aveyard, and then Blade Breaker. Blade Breaker will probably get its own sequel Saturday video depending on how I feel about Realmbreaker, but I have a feeling I'm going to like them both, to be completely honest. Sisters of the Winterwood. I picked this up at the library on a whim. The cover really drew me in, and the blurb on the inside of the book really, I was drawn to it, to be completely honest with you. It wasn't previously on my list, but I was just wandering the library, and it really spoke to me. So I went ahead and I took it out. I love when I go to the library. One of my favorite things to do is pick out books that I already know I want to read, but wander the shelves just enough until I find the one book that is speaking to me that wasn't on my TBR, you know, because like I have a rotating like Rolodex of a TBR in the back of my head of, oh, that's familiar. I've been meaning to read that eventually, but then I see something that is completely unfamiliar to me but still speaks to me, and I go, I'm gonna pick that one up, and it's like a wild card. It's like I'm gonna pick that one up, and I know nothing about it, nothing previously about it. And then also, the Sunbearer Trials. I need to get a move on specifically on some of these because I will have had them checked out for 2 cycles. I will probably start with the Sunbearer Trials because it is pretty short. I could probably finish this in like a day and a half or maybe just one sitting. And I'm going to do all of my audiobooks that I haven't done yet because I'm not going to be able to recheck those out. So I want to get through my audiobooks and the Sunbearer Trials at the very least. And in audio, I have The Weight of Blood and A Discovery of Witches, so I need to get started on those 2, the Sunbearer Trials, and Blade Breaker is the other one that I've had for 6 weeks now because I accidentally checked this out not knowing that it was a sequel. So I will feel guilty, but if I have to check out Blade Breaker again for a 3rd time, I will. I'll just feel really guilty about it. So I'll just try to turn in like as much as humanly possible. And then I have the Hawthorne Legacy on hold, and I have something else that's on hold. I don't remember what it was, but I have those. And then after that, we will be going into the portion of my TBR called Shop My Shelves, where I am only reading books that I already own, mixed in with a couple of wild cards from the library here and there, but primarily books I already own. Those are already planned, and that will be a lot of fun. So I'm going to try to get through my big stack of library books and go from there. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I would really love to see you around. So remember to drink water and be nice to each other and exude kindness and empathy with everything that you do. If you'd like to catch me anywhere else, you can catch me on Twitter and on Twitch at HuntressGia, and basically just about everywhere else. You could check my link tree in the little doobly-doo downstairs, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye! All of these aren't even the books that I read this month. This is just to show you the effect of like what I read this month, like in physical form, because most of what I read is in ebook format, but it makes for a great thumbnail.